So, Liz, the first question we've got, many of our women talk about loss and changes in their libido during pregnancy, following their cancer diagnosis, the subsequent treatment they go through, and the side effects that these treatments can cause, but also in the context of after birth and after a loss as well. Could you explain to us what libido is and how it can be affected by the list of things I've just gone through?
That's a really, really good question. In its most simple form, libido is your sex drive. And I think it's something that most of us take for granted before we get ill. There are days when you feel really, really horny and up for it, and days when you just want a cup of tea, but it naturally wanes throughout your life. And libido is affected by three main things. One is your brain function, how you could be watching a film. For me, it used to be something like Fleabag, and you'd physically get turned on. You'd watch or hear something, you think, oh, hello, I'm in the mood. That brain function of responding to something that you're seeing or feeling. The second thing is learned behavior. And if you grew up in a very open family who talked about sex and intimacy, it may be something you're okay with exploring and talking about. But if you grew up in a family where sex was private and not something that you spoke about, then you may have a very different attitude to being comfortable with your own libido. But the third thing that really affects it is hormones. And for women, it's estrogen. And we know if you're pregnant, your hormones go crazy. They're up and down depending on the stages. And if you add into that breast cancer, that has a huge impact on your hormones. Now, anyone who is estrogen positive will be given treatments to reduce the amount of estrogen they produce, such as tamoxifen. And although that doesn't turn your ovaries off, it stops your breasts reacting to estrogen, which means you absorb less. If you have a triple negative cancer, then you'll be given chemotherapy. And what chemotherapy does is switch your ovaries off. It's often not permanent, but that means that you don't produce any estrogen. And without estrogen, it's very, very hard to feel in the mood for sex, to actually want sex, and to physically respond to sex. And this is something that I really, really struggled with, because I didn't realize how much of an effect it would have on me. And I remember about 2 months into chemo, and I just thought, I never want sex again. Plus the hot flushes and the night sweats that you get with the menopausal side effects. I used to love spooning with my husband, and now I'm like, get away from me. I'm too hot, you're annoying. I don't want to be near you in bed. Plus there's I don't want you to look at me, because I found it really hard to look at myself. I didn't like the scar. I didn't like how my body had changed. I didn't find myself sexy. And although my husband said he still did, I didn't believe him, because I had a bald head, I got no pubes, and I got a lump on my breast. And it's really hard when you've lost your body image, your self-esteem, to trust that your partner still finds you attractive and to let them come close. My husband didn't understand why I didn't want sex. And he thought it meant that I wasn't attracted to him anymore. And it was really hard to sit down and have that conversation. And actually, I got him to read the chapter in my book to realize it's not my fault. It's a consequence of the treatments that are being given to me. It's not your fault. I still find you attractive, but things physically work very, very differently now. And having that conversation was a really, really important step to us becoming intimate and getting our libido back. I talked to quite a few women on social media about how they felt about sex after breast cancer. And so many women wanted their partners to divorce them and go and find a woman with a healthy libido and 2 breasts who wanted sex, because they never did. And I was one of them. And it's really, really hard when you are dealing with so much mentally. Pregnancy, a new baby, breast cancer, change in body image, the fear of recurrence, to actually put sex back on the table and make it part of your life again. But I think if you can understand, it's not your fault, but you can still have an orgasm and your sex drive can come back. There are things that you can do to help, and you can have some form of intimate life again. Having that conversation can really, really help.
And do you think, obviously, the experience you've just outlined there, Liz, is framed very much in a breast cancer diagnosis? And do you feel with the other forms of cancer that people go through, they require surgery or not? So obviously some of them might purely be a medical intervention and a treatment rather than a surgery, but it nonetheless has that impact on, certainly, I think, femininity, loss of hair, other scarring, other operative procedures that could happen, and it still has that knock-on impact. But is perhaps less seen if it hasn't been something like breast
Completely.
cancer, something that people have a knowledge of?
I think anyone going through a cancer treatment is going to have a problem with their libido, their body image, their self-esteem. You could have a colostomy. You have to get used to changing a bag and what do you do with your bag during sex. Scars, pelvic radiation, lose your hair, you get chronic pain. All of that leads into your brain and how you feel. And it can take years to get used to learning to love your body again. And if you don't like yourself, it's very hard to let someone else like you and think about sex. And I think it's saying it's okay. This is normal. I need help. We can talk about that later. Who I need to talk to, what I can do with my partner to try and remember that cancer doesn't define you. And if you are in a relationship, there is the glue that holds you together that you can still get back. But it's just being kind to yourself and accepting, yeah, this is going to take me a while to work through.
Just one other supplementary question, if you don't mind. Even if these issues come in as a result of anything, it might necessarily be related specifically to cancer, but do you think there is an issue wider in what we understand as libido, what it is generally, or do we take it for granted that we think we know what it actually is, but the mechanism of it is misunderstood, and we could all benefit from taking the time to understand it better?
I think we take it for granted. We assume that everyone has a high sex drive, and we assume everyone is having sex 3 times a week because that's what we see on the movies. But a lot of my friends who've had babies say, look, I haven't had sex for 2 years. We're just too tired, we're too exhausted. And your libido changes with your life circumstances. And I think it's exploring that if you lose your libido, it may cause your partner to lose your libido, because depression, anxiety can enter into that relationship and it changes. And I think it's a fluid thing. And I think if you haven't been intimate with your partner for a couple of months, it's worth just talking and saying, how are we both feeling? Is it just within that spell we're not really in the mood, or one of us does want it? And I think it's talking about it and realizing where each of you are and what you can do to try and get it back. But I think doctors and nurses need to be aware that cancer treatments will affect people's sex lives, and it should be a basic human right, a human need. And we need to try and help patients and their partners get their sex lives back.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right, I'm just going to stop